Hello and welcome back to the Middling Along podcast. I'm your host, Emma Thomas, and before I introduce today's guest, please allow me a minute of blowing my own trumpet, because this week I discovered that Middling Along had been voted one of the top 25 podcasts for midlife and menopause by the Latte Lounge, featuring up along with big hitters like The Shift, Postcards from Midlife, and even Louise Newson herself. In other news, I have revamped my newsletter. The Messy Middle covers all things perimenopause, midlife, and optimising our brains and bodies for a longer, healthier second half of our lives. So hop on over to middlingalong.com to subscribe now. Okay, I'm delighted to welcome today's guest, journalist and author Rosamund Dean. Former Deputy Editor of Grazia magazine, she's the author of Mindful Drinking, How Cutting Down Can Change Your Life, and her latest book, Reconstruction, How to Rebuild Your Body, Mind and Life After a Breast Cancer Diagnosis, is described as a pragmatic but positive handbook for anyone navigating a diagnosis of primary breast cancer. Welcome to the podcast, Rosamund.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
So you were diagnosed with breast cancer end of 2020, beginning of 2021. And in case anyone out there has forgotten, we were in another COVID lockdown at the time.
They probably blocked it from their memories.
It all seems like a very weird parallel universe ago, but it did happen. You talk about your diagnosis at the start of the book, but can you talk us through it a little bit? So how does it feel when you get that life-changing news that so many of us dread?
Wow, it's really interesting actually, because of all the moments throughout my breast cancer treatment, the diagnosis probably was not the worst one. I know I've since heard people say the diagnosis was the worst moment of the whole thing. It hit me. I thought, this is it. I'm going to die. This is how I'm going to die. And I actually didn't have that experience. I mean, obviously it was horrible and scary and upsetting, but I didn't have that, you know,
visceral,
that kind of knife edge fear that some people report. I kind of thought, right, this is it's breast cancer. This is this is what Kylie had. It's like totally survivable. I'll be living my best life like Sam Taylor Johnson in a few years.
That's very zen of you.
I really, you might say zen, you might say naive, because I had no idea.
There's a bit of shock and sort of surreal, kind of like a bit of out of body. Is this actually happening to me? Is it, you're kind of maybe a bit sort of slightly looking in and having this out of body experience of like, oh look, there's Rosamund being given some shitty news.
Exactly. It was partly shock, I think, and also partly denial and partly naivety. I had no idea what. I mean, if you'd have asked me, I would have said, yeah, I know cancer treatment's hard. I know it's really brutal. But I had no idea of the reality of going through 5 months of chemotherapy, mastectomy surgery, then radiotherapy. Then I had another 8 months of chemo after that, adjuvant chemo. It was so long and so brutal. And I was just like a shell of a human being by the end of it. And I didn't know that breast cancer treatment would put me into early menopause. I didn't know everything that comes with that. I didn't know that I wouldn't be able to have HRT. There was so much that I didn't know. And I think had I known all of that at the point of my diagnosis, it would have been a very different reaction. I probably wouldn't have been so calm.
So you've taken all of the things that you've learned along the way and some more besides, because you've interviewed a whole bunch of different experts and put it into the book. But sort of at what point did you decide to write the book, and why did you decide to write the book?
So I didn't decide to write the book until probably after the first year. So I was diagnosed, like you say, my diagnosis was confirmed in January 2021. And throughout 2021, I wrote a column in the Sunday Times Style that was kind of about my cancer treatment following the journey. It was a column half written by me and half by my husband, Jonathan, who is a journalist at the Sunday Times.
Interesting. Is that still available online, that if people want to go back and have a look at some of that?
It's all online. And it was actually amazing because it made me realise how little there is out there about the person who is the main support for the person going through cancer treatment. Because, Jonathan was, as you mentioned, we were in a lockdown. He was doing the homeschooling with our 2 kids and kind of dealing with all of that. And it's almost worse. I mean, going through cancer treatment is horrible, but if there's one thing worse than it, it's watching someone you love go through cancer treatment. And I had 10 people a day asking how I was, and nobody was really asking how he was. So I think it was really good for the column to kind of show both
good
sides.
Outlet as well for both of you to kind of process some of what you were going through.
Exactly, yeah. And we got contacted by so many people saying, thank you for kind of describing both sides of this experience, because it is a lot. So I did that column for a year, and then when that finished, then I had a conversation with my editor at HarperCollins, she had just returned to work after a year off with her own breast cancer diagnosis. So I went for a coffee with her, and we talked about what kind of book we might do, because she had bought, there existed lots of cancer books. Most of them are kind of memoirs or really kind of like sciencey books. And what didn't exist was a kind of warm, relatable, really practical guide that was, when we talked about it, we said we want it to be almost like one of those pregnancy books, which is like, this is what to expect at each stage of what you're going through, and down to what to pack in your hospital bag.
Not onesies. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe grown-up onesies.
Exactly. So, so I talked to her about it. And the great thing about that was she had had a totally different breast cancer diagnosis to me. So her cancer was hormone receptor positive. Mine was triple negative. She had different treatment to me. She had a lumpectomy. I had a mastectomy. She didn't have chemo. So writing the book with her as my editor was amazing, because I was able to address, things that I might not have thought of.
Yeah.
She was like, well, what about blah, blah, blah. So because breast cancer it's not one disease, it's all these different.
Yeah, we don't necessarily realise that unless we might be in the trenches, and so many different variants, different treatments, depending on that, different outlooks.
Exactly. Yeah, so many different ones. And the other really important thing that we wanted to address with the book was the experience of life after breast cancer treatment, because that's the point at which your medical team kind of goes, okay, bye.
See you. Like, hopefully not see you.
Like, hang on now. I've got to be like looking out for these signs of recurrence that are all very vague and nebulous. I've got osteoporosis. I've got bloody menopausal symptoms. No one's helping me with any of this help. So we wanted to address all of that as well.
Brilliant. So you've already mentioned the fact that your treatment has put you into early menopause. Was there anything kind of through your treatment that kind of helped you understand that, prepare for it? Or did you really have to kind of go out and either find out the hard way, but also then find more information about that yourself?
Yes, I really had to do it by myself. So there was absolutely no
Which
information.
Which is staggering, really, when you think about what you say, I think, in your in the notes. Sort of 150 women a day are getting a diagnosis. I don't know how many of those are subsequently going into early menopause, but...
Yeah, I don't have stats on that either. I mean, the majority of breast cancer cases are in postmenopausal women. It's less common for women to be premenopausal. Perhaps that's why there's so little information. But an interesting thing that I learned from talking to all the doctors and oncologists and experts that I spoke to for the book is that even if you are postmenopausal when you have breast cancer treatment, it can bring back all the menopausal symptoms, like a second menopause.
Oh, that's rubbish.
I know.
That's annoying.
I know. And if you're on HRT, then you'll be advised to come off it because of because it could increase your risk of recurrence. So you'll be dealing with all these symptoms as well. So there's a lot more support is needed for people going through this, because there is nothing offered. I mean, I guess it could be hospital and doctor specific. Maybe some doctors are much more on it than mine was. But, I had a great oncologist at a big hospital in central London. You would expect them to be kind of all over the latest information, and all they told me was that my periods might stop after chemotherapy. So my periods stopped right away after the second round of chemo. And then when I finished chemo, I said to my oncologist, so what happens now? Do you think my periods will come back, or is that it now? And she said, to be honest, if you're under 40, then your periods might come back. If you're over 40, they're less likely to. And I was like, what about if you're exactly 40?
50-50.
Yeah, she literally shrugged and was like, oh, I don't know. Who knows? So, so the other thing is that so many menopausal symptoms are really, really similar to side effects of chemotherapy. So,
disentangling all of that.
Yeah. So chemo can actually cause and bring on, night sweats, fatigue, insomnia, loss of libido, dry eyes, dry skin, joint pains, muscle aches, brain fog. All of those things are side effects of chemotherapy. So being plunged into menopause during chemo and then kind of emerging from chemotherapy but still being in menopause, you're like, what is going on here? What of these symptoms are to do with chemo? What could be early menopause? It's a lot of disentangling all of that, which took some time, definitely.
And there's a lot, we are hearing more and more in the mainstream media about menopause writ large, but certainly about HRT. And I think there is a little bit of, we hear from, from people who can't take HRT for whatever reason, and sort of obviously hormone sensitive breast cancer is one of those reasons. It is a bit like, well, what about me if I can't take it, or that sort of fear that through not taking it that they're then at greater risk of some of those things like osteoporosis, like cardiovascular disease. I mean, I know that the jury is out about things like dementia, for example. But yeah, that's clearly, part of what you're trying to do in the book is about that after, because hopefully your after is going to be years and decades. And so, what are the things that you can do to help yourself both sort of, have that healthier older age or long, life post breast cancer, but also, about mitigating, minimizing the risks of recurrence. Are there sort of key things particularly that people might want to focus on in terms of the sort of, minimizing recurrence? Is it, would you got secondary breast cancer? Is that what you'd call it?
Yes, exactly. The first thing I should say is you mentioned their hormone receptor positive breast cancer. And actually, it's not just that type of breast cancer where you can't have HRT, because mine was triple negative, which has nothing to do with hormones. And I thought exactly the same thing. Well, that's, why would HRT be a problem for me? So I asked my oncologist if I could have it, and she said no, because cancer cells can mutate and change. And she basically said, if it comes back, it might be the other type. So she was, I know that there are different views, and I know that some women after breast cancer struggle so much with the menopausal symptoms that they think it's worth the risk to have HRT.
Yeah.
That's absolutely their choice. In my case, my oncologist was, she was quite firm that HRT was not an option for me. It's been a case of kind of looking at each menopausal symptom individually and kind of trying to deal with each symptom individually. So in terms of osteoporosis, I had a bone scan after chemo, and they said you do have osteoporosis in your spine, and it's caused partly by chemotherapy and partly by the early menopause. So I now have these infusions called Zometa infusions, which is zoledronic acid, and I have that every 6 months for 3 years, which will hopefully strengthen my bones and also reduce the risk of cancer recurrence in my bones. So yes, double benefit to that. Exactly. So you do have to be postmenopausal to have that treatment. And And I asked about it several times before I got to have it, because they kept saying, well, your periods might come back after chemo. So you do have to, if you're premenopausal before cancer treatment, you might have to keep pushing in order to get that. So that's my advice on that. And in terms of, I suppose, there's sort of two questions there, one about recurrence and one about the menopausal
and I'm sure,
symptoms.
some of those things overlap in terms of, kind of lifestyle tweaks, just generally.
Exactly. Yeah. So in terms of recurrence, this was one of the things that I was very naive about, because I did think at the end of cancer treatment, they would kind of say, that's it, you've got the all clear, you're done with cancer treatment. And I had an appointment with a surgical registrar who wasn't actually my normal surgeon, and she was quite matter of fact about this. And she said, your diagnosis, triple negative, grade 3, stage 3. You didn't have a complete response to chemo before surgery. All of these factors added together mean your risk of recurrence is quite high. It's about 40%. So you just need to be extremely vigilant for signs of cancer recurrence. And they elsewhere in your body. It wouldn't be a lump on the other breast. Cancer recurrence would be elsewhere in the body. The most likely places are bones, brain, lungs, and liver. So she I mean, I don't know why I'm laughing. It's not at all funny, but it's just so ridiculous. She was like, so the things you have to look out for are headaches, back pain, shoulder pain, any kind of pain in your neck because there's lymph nodes there, a cough, if it's in your lung, a symptom could be a cough. And I was like, oh, what about if it's in your liver? And she was like, yeah, there aren't really any symptoms of that. Maybe fatigue.
Great. So
I was like,
you've got the long list.
Okay, so all the things that most people have on an almost daily basis, stiff neck, tiredness, bit of a headache.
If I wasn't a hypochondriac before, I certainly am now.
Exactly. So I definitely had a period where I was like, how am I going to live my life without panicking about every kind of twinge? And also the brain is incredibly weird and powerful. If you start to worry about a pain in your body, it just gets worse. So, if you have a bit of shoulder pain, you start to worry about it, you become fixated on it, and it gets worse and worse and worse. And I did have one point at the end of last year where I was just completely convinced that I had cancer recurrence in my shoulder. And I went for an MRI and a CT scan, a bone scan. They did all the scans and they were like, it's not cancer recurrence. And as soon as I got that information, the pain went away. So it really was like, once I'd been through that, I was like, right, this is as psychological as it is anything else. So I'm going to have to learn to manage the kind of fear and anxiety, which are also things that are exacerbated by the menopause. Unfortunately,
and the stress that can exacerbate other symptoms. So it's all this kind of big interconnection of different things.
Exactly. It's all interconnected, and so the negative aspects are all interconnected in terms of fear and anxiety and depressive symptoms, which can tie into all these things and can kind of lead to each other in this awful vicious circle. The flip side to that is the positive things that you can do are also really interconnected. So, for instance, exercise. I know it's so boring. People don't want to hear that you have to exercise. And also, I was one of those people. I was not an exerciser before I got cancer at all. I just thought it was boring. I didn't want to do it. I thought people really exercised because of weight loss, and I felt like I don't need to lose weight, so I don't. It's just not my thing.
No, I'm evangelical about it now from a perimenopause perspective. Yes. It's been really annoying for everyone else. It's like,
same. I'm one of those really, really annoying people that's got into it later in life, because I was always like, I don't want to be sweaty. I just can't be bothered. It's just not my bag. And then, especially while doing the research for this book, every single element of the book, when I was talking to people about psychological health, about menopausal symptoms, about bone health, about reducing your risk of recurrence, about every single element of it, the number one thing they said was exercise. And so many of them said, if the benefits of exercise could be encapsulated into a pill, it would be...
We'd all be taking it like mad.
It would be hailed as an enormous breakthrough in cancer treatment. It would be like on every front page. But because
it's so interesting, isn't
because
it?
you can't like package it up and sell it, people, it doesn't get that much attention. So yes, science, there's lots and lots, hundreds of studies have shown that exercise can reduce the risk of breast cancer recurrence by anywhere between 30 and 60%.
Wow.
Depending on which study you read.
That's huge, isn't it? I mean, you probably couldn't take
massive.
something, like you say, that a drug that would make that much difference.
Yeah, exactly. So it's so important. And obviously exercise is very good for your mental health. So if you're feeling lots of fear and anxiety, exercise helps dissipate the cortisol and your other stress hormones, and it helps calm you down.
Sleep better.
Helps you sleep better. And then obviously if you have better sleep, that helps with mood, and it helps you make better choices about what you eat. And all those positive things really, really feed into each other. And I interviewed one doctor for the book, and I was asking about testosterone, and I was like, okay, I know I can't have HRT, and I know I shouldn't have estrogen because it can increase my risk of recurrence, but what about testosterone? I keep reading about it. And I would like my libido to be what it once was. And this doctor that I spoke to was like, look, there just isn't the research to show that testosterone is safe to take on its own, like without progesterone, and it's not normal for the human body to have that. But she was like, they want to take a pill because it's easier, but exercise, specifically strength training, anything that kind of strengthens your muscles, increases the amount of testosterone in your body. So even the libido symptoms of menopause can be improved by exercise. So it is literally every single thing is improved by exercise. And I, like you, am now one of those very annoying evangelical people
about it. I'm sorry if you're listening and you're forced to hear me witter on about it on Instagram or constantly. So you've talked a little bit about the sort of psychological side of sort of post-treatment, but while you were going through the treatment itself, were the sort of the hardest parts the sort of physical experience or the sort of the mental experience that you were going through?
Well, again, they're kind of interlinked. So I suppose the physical experience of chemo is, I mean, the fatigue is just unreal. It's like the early months of pregnancy where you just like want to go to bed at 8:00 every night. It's like that, but even worse. It's like can't physically get your body out of bed kind of fatigue. So it's that, but also the effects on your skin and your, like, the mouth ulcers just make it difficult to eat or talk or do anything, the dryness, and obviously losing your hair, not just from your head, but your eyelashes and eyebrows. And those physical effects really manifest into psychological symptoms as well, because then, looking in the mirror is just a really depressing experience.
You don't recognise yourself. It's like, who is this person? That's not me.
Exactly. And if you've been the kind of person like I would say probably most women are, who are juggling a lot of different things and really, really busy and, big job and looking after kids and so much stuff going on, to all of a sudden not be able to kind of keep up with your kids as they run along the road to school, or to, I don't know, just feel like you can't do all the things that you could do. It's just really, really, really hard. It's psychologically very difficult to overcome.
And so much of our worth is tied up in that sort of productivity and that busyness and that your kind of job and your identity.
Exactly.
So suddenly, you are just sort of, you're just in inverted commas, a cancer patient going through chemo. It's like, that's all you can do to kind of get through, is like focus in on this one thing.
I know. And you should be able to just say, okay, I'm literally having chemo right now. I don't have to do anything else. Yeah. But it's like crazy how hard that is. You just feel really lazy and just like you're letting people down all over the place. And also, I'm sure other people don't feel like that. People wouldn't expect you to be doing what you were before, but you can't help feeling like that inside. And also, I say other people wouldn't expect you to, but you do still have, I remember going out for dinner during chemo and having friends be like, "Go on, have a glass of wine," and I'd be like, "I'm in chemo. I'm really trying not to drink. Like, I'm having chemo tomorrow. I've got to pass my neutrophil test in order to have the chemo. Like, I don't want to.
Yeah,
I don't want to
turn it off when I leave the house." And then
yeah. I mean, there is still. I do think pregnancy is the only time in a person's life when you're not actually pressured into drinking. Even chemo, but it still happens.
So how long are you sort of post sort of the end of your treatment now?
Well, I am officially 2 years cancer-free now. Yay! So it's not actually 2 years since the end of my treatment, but it's 2 years since my mastectomy. And that the surgery date is the date from which they say, that's your cancer-free anniversary. Yeah, so all the treatment I've had since then has been to reduce the risk of recurrence. So all the radiotherapy and the extra months of adjuvant chemo, all of that went on for like another year after surgery. So I'm about a year out of treatment and 2 years cancer-free.
Yeah. And how do you... I don't know. I'm assuming there must be days where you can, go a day or a few days or whatever without thinking about it. How do you find it? Do you find that as more time goes on?
I would say so if I'm now 2 years cancer-free, the first year of that, I was still in treatment because I was having radiotherapy and then chemo. And also at that point, I hadn't yet had that conversation with the surgical registrar where she said, you have to be very vigilant for signs of recurrence. So during that year, I was still coping with treatment and finding it really hard, but I felt like the end was nearly in sight. The year after that, when treatment had finished and I knew my risk of recurrence was comparatively high, I would say that was kind of the hardest year, really. And now that I'm 2 years cancer-free, which is really recently, that's only last week that it's 2 years. That's been a really big turning point for me. I've just been like walking on air this week because I went to go and see my oncologist, and quite often throughout cancer treatment, I'd go to see my oncologist and I'd be like, "Oh, I've heard somebody say such and such can reduce my risk of recurrence. Is that right?" Or I've heard somebody say, and I would like tell her things I'd seen on the internet or I'd heard people say, and 9 times out of 10, she's like, no, come on, no. That's mushrooms are not going to cure your cancer. No. She's very matter of fact. But when I went to go and see her a couple of weeks ago, I was like, so I've heard 2 years after surgery is a really, really important milestone, and my risk of recurrence drops off after that. Is that right? And she was like, yes, that is correct. Yeah, exactly. And every case of breast cancer is different. In my case, because my cancer was particularly aggressive, she said if it was going to come back, it would happen quickly. So the fact that it hasn't after 2 years is a really, really good sign. I think 5 years is when you can really
relax,
breathe out. Yeah, 5 years is the real turning point. But I think 2 years is a good milestone, and I do feel a lot better having hit that milestone. I will feel even better when I hit 5 years. I'll probably have a party then.
Excellent. Good stuff. Did you also find the process of writing the book quite sort of therapeutic and healing?
Yeah, I mean, the first part of the book is really kind of a guide to treatment and chemo, surgery, radiotherapy, hormone treatments, targeted treatments, all of that, and going into all of that and kind of reliving my own experience. I did find that quite hard. There was definitely a point where I was like, why did I agree to do this? It's like,
just sort of forget about it.
It's reliving my trauma. But the second part of the book is all about, it's partly about how to kind of rebuild yourself after the end of treatment for a primary breast cancer diagnosis. So psychologically as well as physically, just kind of getting back on your feet, and all of the things that you can do to manage that fear and anxiety and improve your mood and improve those menopausal symptoms. And also there's a whole section on I call it future-proofing your body. So it's about reducing your risk of recurrence. I have to be clear, of course, that there is no silver bullet, and you can't say about anything, do this and it will stop your cancer coming back, because there are just too many factors. Nobody really knows why it happens. You could do everything perfectly and still get cancer. But there is lots of evidence that there are plenty of things you can do to reduce your risk. So nobody can wipe out their entire risk of recurrence, but you can reduce it by quite a lot. So I look into all the ways that you can do that.
And also, you know, all of those things, well, maybe not all of those things, but as a collectively are going to be beneficial from the point of view of lots of other things like reducing cardiovascular disease risk and
Exactly. So writing that part of the book, I really enjoyed, because it felt really positive and optimistic, and I really felt like it was going to help people. And I really felt good about the fact that if I'd had this to read during my diagnosis, it would make me feel more optimistic and positive. And that's really what I wanted to do with it. And like you say, you can't ever say this will 100% ensure that you don't get cancer again. But not only will it reduce your risk of that, which is really, really important, but also if the cancer does come back, if you're in good physical health, you'll be much better able to cope with treatment. You'll be
more resilient generally.
Yeah, exactly. And also it reduces your risk of heart disease, diabetes, dementia, like all these kind of lifestyle steps will just hopefully keep you living well for longer overall.
So perfect place to wrap it up, but it remains a sobering statistic that 1 in 7 women in the UK will get a breast cancer diagnosis in their lifetime. So if you're listening and that's you or your best friend or someone that you know well, we're sending you all the love, and I absolutely wholeheartedly recommend Reconstruction, whether that's for you or for your friend. Go out and buy them a copy. Might be a whole lot better than a bunch of flowers or a bottle of wine, which they won't be able to drink. But yeah, congratulations. It really is a fantastic book. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on to chat to us.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to the Middling Along podcast. Do remember to subscribe to be notified when our next episode is live. And why not visit the blog at www.middlingalong.com to sign up to my newsletter as well. I do hope you enjoyed listening today. If you did, I'd be really grateful if you would consider leaving a short review, as that helps people find the podcast and helps get it noticed. Hope you can join us next time. Goodbye for now.